Recording going? Okay. Erev Tov to everybody. A couple of announcements or whatever you want to say. First of all, tonight, my mother's father's yard site, my grandfather, my Zadie's yard site, he passed away when I was 15. And I was, in spite of the fact that I was in Chicago and he was in Toronto, we were very, very, very close. Ad kedei kach that I was zoche to inherit the shas that he used. The brothers, his sons, decided I would get it because they knew we were very close. So it says yard side Shmuel Aaron ben Moshe Chaim Zichrono Livracha. The Shama should have an aliyah. The learning will be in the zchut neshama of his of aliyat neshama. That's first of all. Second of all, I mentioned last week, and I was able to be in touch with Barnea Salavan. I'm assuming most of you don't know him. Some of you may know his name. I will give a proper introduction next week. He will join us next week at 7 o'clock. He is an incredible authority in archaeology, Tanakh, and everything, especially this exact kufa that we're learning, this time period that we're learning. I have known him for over 20 years. And if I ever have a question that has to do with anything in Tanakh or archaeology, or sometimes both, he's my first phone call. So we're very, very fortunate to be able to have him with us. Bezrat Hashem next week, next Sunday night. And also, if time's permitting, as I said, I will also talk for just a few minutes next week about Purim Mishulash, the Purim that falls on a Friday that really spans a period of 3 days in a sense, not for us, but it may affect you in some way. Okay, now, told you we're gonna have a little fun tonight. I didn't mean fun as in like we're gonna watch a big funny movie or anything like that, but we're gonna go in some interesting directions tonight. As those of you who've been in this class for a period of time know, that on occasion we discuss in Navi class. Now, in Kuzari, we talk a lot about theology and Hashem and how Hashem works with us, all kinds of things. But in Navi, we do it, but only tangentially. In order to learn Perek Kaf, which is going to be in chapter 20 of Melachim Bet, we're going to start with in a moment. There'll be a couple pieces of introduction, one from a Gemara we're going to look at, one from the Dat Sofrim we're going to look at, before we can even start the Perek. And it's going to raise within the first 1, 2, 3, about 5 psukim. It's going to raise some very interesting / serious theological questions. And we will deal with it a little bit, each one which can be an entire class. But we're going to deal with 2 or 3 of these things in a shorter format tonight. So the first thing I want to do is to share with you this Gemara that it will be the basis of what we're going to start with tonight. Make it even a little bit bigger. Okay. I'm going to start over here where it says Amar Hamnuna. I will translate. And before I do, let me give you the basic overview of what happens in the first few psukim of the parak, so you'll know what we're talking about. We know that Chizkiyahu has now averted a major catastrophe. Hashem promised and delivered, obviously, that the bad guys were going to all be wiped out. We know that 185,000 of the soldiers who were poised to attack Jerusalem just magically, in quotes, went poof, they all died, leaving probably 5 people behind, Sancheriv being one of them, and then he dies at the end of the last chapter. This chapter begins with Chizkiyahu being gravely ill, Yeshayahu coming to him and telling him that in the name of God, you're going to die. Chizkiyahu davens to Hashem, and the Navi then tells him before he even leaves his home that God has now updated his lifespan. And okay, so that's the general idea. It's like, okay, that's a lot of little things that's going to add up to some giant stuff. Let's take a look at the Gemara. Amar Rav Hamnuna. Rav Hamnuna said, "My dichtiv." What does it mean when it says Mi kehechacham u'miodeh pesher davar? What does this pasuk mean? So it says it means like this: Mi kakadosh baruch hu, who is as wonderful, as great as God? Shiodeh lasot pshara ben shnei tzadikim. Who is like God, who is able to make a compromise between two great tzaddikim. Who were they? Ben Chizkiyahu, the Yeshayahu. Chizkiyahu on the one hand and Yeshayahu on the other. What was the need for a compromise? Chizkiyahu amar lete Yeshayahu gabai dahachi ashkechan be'Eliyahu da'aza lagabe achav. So evidently there was this standoff. Chizkiyahu said, look, I'm the king. Let Yeshayahu come to me, just like Eliyahu went to Achav, the king. Yeshayahu amar, and Yeshayahu said, Lete Chizkiyahu gabai. Yeshayahu said, you know what? Let Chizkiyahu come to me. Why? Because we saw there's a precedent. The king Yehoram went to Elisha the prophet. So they have this standoff. Now, what was the drive? How you telling me these two are great tzaddikim on the one hand, and then you're telling me they were having an argument of who should be coming to whom? It sounds almost like a power play. That's not tonight's topic. It's just the lead into it. Ma'asa Kadosh Baruch Hu. So what did God do? Hevi Yisurim al Chizkiyahu. He brought difficult times on Chizkiyahu. Va'amar lo Yeshayahu, and he told Yeshayahu, Lech ubakeret hacholeh. Go and visit the sick individual. So now neither one of them has a choice. Yeshayahu has to go visit Chizkiyahu at God's command, and Chizkiyahu isn't going anywhere because he's sick. Shenemar, for it says, this is the first pasuk in the next chapter we're about to read. By Yamim Ahem, in those days, or at that time, and when is that time? We're going to see. Chalach Chizkiyahu lamut. The Chizkiyahu started to die. Vayavo elav Yeshayahu ben Amotz. Yeshayahu ben Amotz came to him, Hanavi, the prophet. Vayomer elav ko'amar Hashem, and he said to him, this is the first pasuk. I didn't read it in the text yet, but we're seeing it quoted now here in the Gemara. Here's what Hashem has said to tell you. Tzav leveitcha, give a command to your house, which means set your affairs in order. Ki met ata velo tichya, because you are about to die and you will not live. Well, the obvious question about the whole thing is, right at this point is, if he's going to die, he's not going to live. So why does the Navi say you're going to die and not live? So Gemara asks the question, "My himet ata velo tichye, met ata." Hold on one second. I'm just going to ask if anyone could just mute themselves, please. If I didn't already mute you, thank you. Ki met ata velo tichye. Metata ba'olam hazeh, you're going to die physically in this world. Lo tichye le'olam haba, nor are you going to live in the next world. It's a pretty strong, harsh punishment. So the next obvious question would be like, what? That's all this what the Gemara says. Amar le. So he said to him, my kuli hai. What is it that I did that's so horrible that would make me not even live in the next world? Amar le. So he said to him, Mishum, this is Yeshayahu, said to Chizkiyahu, Mishum lo asakta b'piri v'rivya. You didn't get married. You didn't try to have kids. Amar le, I'll tell you why I didn't get married and try to have kids. Mishum dechazai li beruach hakodesh, because I saw with Ruach HaKodesh, the nafke minai benen delo ma'alu, because I saw that I was going to have a son or children that would not be worthy, would not be good people. Amar le, bahade kav shederachmana lamalach, mind the mefkadet ibayach lemevad, umadanicha kame kuchabrichu laved. Amar le, I'll translate freely in a moment. Hashta havli barte. Oh, sorry, I'll stop here. Basically, he says, you don't need to mix in with God's plan. You don't forget about the Ruach HaKodesh. You just do what you're supposed to do. You get married, you have kids, you raise a family. Amar le. So he says, that's the reason that I'm going to die in this world and the next world. He says, I got an idea. Chizkiyahu says, I got a great idea. Hashta havli bartech. Do me a favor. You have a daughter. I'm single. Marry her off to me. Efshar degar mazdachuta didi v'didcha. Maybe because of your zchuyot, your merits, and my merits combined, then maybe whatever I saw in Ruach HaKodesh will get pushed aside, and they'll have proper children. Amar le, kvar nigzera alecha gezerah. Sorry, Charlie, the die has been cast. Hashem already determined you're going to die. Remember, the pasuk says, and we're going to look at the text in a few minutes. Yeshayahu delivers a message to the king and says, in the name of Hashem, you're going to die. So now Yeshayahu was kind of strengthening and saying, look, I told you, that's it. Amarle ben Amarle, so Chizkiyahu said, Ben Amotz, Kale nevuatcha, stop your prophesying, but say, and leave my house. Why? Kach mekublani beit avi abba. So I have learned from my father's household. Afilu is a famous line. Afilu cherev chada munachat al tzavaro. Even if a sharp blade, knife, or a sword is placed on someone's neck, shaladam, al yimana atzmo min harachamim. You do not give up hope. You do not stop asking Hashem for mercy. What does that mean? He said that, look, you just told me I'm going to die. Okay, fine. But I have a way around it maybe, because the reason that I was going to die potentially is that I was going to, because I didn't lasok b'pirya b'rivya, I didn't get married, didn't have children. So I have a way around it. And now all of a sudden, Yeshayahu was putting in his own 2 cents. It wasn't a nevuah, it wasn't a prophecy, it was his own opinion, which is, look, I already told you. God said it's over. So then Yeshayahu is told by the king, get out of here. I don't want to have to do. Why? Because my Masorah is that even if the situation is horrifically bad and there's a sharp sword right on my neck, you don't give up hope. Okay. Interesting little background to that first pasuk. We're going to see how that applies in a few minutes. But we have to look at one more thing now. I don't know why I took it off of screen share, because I needed one more slide, which is actually 3 parts. Okay, this is the introduction to the parak of the Dat Sofrim. Vayamim kashim biyoter liYisrael. In some very difficult times for Israel. Nofel malkam hatzadik hagadol lemishkav v'hu omed lamut. The tzaddik, the great tzaddik, meaning the king Chizkiyahu, became very sick and he was dying. Hanavi hagadol shebotam hayamim, the great Navi, prophet of that time, Yeshayahu. Now you'll notice he comes and delivers a message, right? He just tells the message from God, you're going to die. And he doesn't daven on his behalf. He doesn't turn to God. But he says, as they say in modern Hebrew, dugri. He says it straight out, very bluntly, your end is here. Davar machala zo katuv b'firsum gadol gam b'sefer melachim. This idea that he got sick is very much clear and well known, both from here and in Sefer Yeshayahu. Because this is going to be, we're going to discuss this tonight, because this story leads us into the topic of hashgacha, kind of like what we would say of bashert, or predestined topics. And it's very instructive, having to do with various events in life. The Sefer Melachim mudgash me'od ha'onesh asamuch lechet ba'anashim gdolim u'Yisrael bichlal. Sefer Melachim, we see many times an emphasis on basically reward and punishment, especially punishment when things are being done wrong. HaMelachim hatzadikim hem ha'edim ha'nechbadim beyoter b'inyan zeh. And the Melachim, who were righteous, are actually, in a sense, the witnesses. They're the ones who give testimony to this particular situation. How? They are the chosen people, the upper crust. And they are required, they're supposed to be above everything. They're supposed to be better than that. And they're supposed to really take the mantle of leadership that was placed upon them from God with all the responsibilities and do the right thing with no hesitation, no problem. If they show a slight weakness, meaning a problem that they didn't do something right, they're already called to task for it. So he tells us there are 2 things. By the way, there's more than that, but he's going to focus on 2. 2 things that Chizkiyahu did that were not matim for that type of person. The first we discussed last week. Shenusach tfilato laHashem lachar shegiu elav divrei melech Ashur. Then we saw last week that when the king of Assyria had sent a message, a letter to him, his response was a tefillah to God, but it was not appropriate the way it was worded. It was like the person speaking with this friend, which we talked about last week in depth. Hadavar hasheni, the second issue that he didn't do right. He didn't get married and have children. Now, this does not mean chas v'shalom to say that someone who is single or someone didn't have children or someone was married and didn't have children, that God forbid that they're not going to live in this world or the next world. That's not what it means at all. It means a person who who's the person of a certain level who makes the conscious decision not to marry, not to have children for reasons that are beyond what might be considered legitimate in quotes, which this one, relying on Ruach HaKodesh, may not have been the right thing according to this. That's where you run yourself into problems. But again, we're talking about a tzaddik. We're not talking about the average person. So he decided that it would be better not to have any children. Even though Chizkiyahu doesn't say that straight out, he had no right to make that decision whatsoever. The difficulties that met Chizkiyahu in his life were great. His purpose, his intention was not to cause problems, but rather to bring in a form of awakening. Chizuk v'hakara li'adam. Ilu mana Hashem et melech Ashur v'lo bichlal. I don't want to read the rest of this. Sorry. I don't want to get into the rest of this now. Okay. So let's take it off of screen share. So right now what we have is a bit of background. The background tells us a bit about the back and forth prior to this first pasuk of how is it that Chizkiyahu is sick and Yeshayahu comes to greet him and to meet him and to pass along this message, this information. Okay, so let's take a look now at the text, please. Let me just see if she messaged me. Sorry. No. Okay, good. Okay.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yeah,
one
sure.
One question before we go on. The Chizkiyahu is reprimanded by Yeshayahu, but that he shouldn't care about the future and he should just do what he has to do. But isn't that what Moshe? No, that he shouldn't care. You know.
So you got
that he saw in the future that a bad king would come out or bad descendants would come out of him. Isn't that what Moshe Rabbeinu also did before he killed the Mitzri?
It says by Moshe Rabbeinu, it says Vayifen ko v'cho v'yar ki enish. Moshe looked each way, saw there was no one there. Says Rashi, Vayifen ko v'cho, who he looked with his Ruach HaKodesh, ad sof kol hadorot, and saw that no one good was going to come out of that Egyptian. Right. And therefore he killed him.
So wouldn't that be a precedent for to give legitimacy for acting that way?
No, it's not. Think of the two cases. They're totally different. They're totally different. He's not talking about his own person.
Well, right. I mean,
first of all, we're talking about Moshe Rabbeinu, and we're talking about Chizkiyahu. You can't
but it's the idea of seeing if anyone would come from a certain, from.
Right. I hear what you're saying. I actually thought about it when I was learning this, and I didn't find anybody that made that comment. By the way, surprised me because I also thought that would make sense. But there are differences. First of all, Moshe Rabbeinu was on a very different level than Chizkiyahu. That's first of all. Second of all, it's not Moshe making a decision about himself as far as his family.
Right.
He's looking at the future of this individual. Now, we did mention this pasuk a couple months ago. And we saw in this class or in Kuzari, I forgot which, and we saw that in this case and one other case at least, that the future events affect the present day. Meaning that because what would have happened had Moshe Rabbeinu seen that someone very good would have come out of that Egyptian, he wouldn't have been able to kill him. Right. So therefore the future, because the Torah is also like Hashem, and Hashem is the Torah, is not bound by time. So the future event made an effect on today's day. Same thing with when Avraham Avinu is trying to get Lot after he was captured. It says Vayodof ad Dan, he chased him to the location of Dan, And it says in Rashi, why did he just all of a sudden stop? Because he saw in Ruach HaKodesh that eventually there would come the day when Yeravam ben Nevat would set up golden calves in Dan, and therefore he became weak because of that. Again, future events had an effect on today. So I understand what you're saying and what you're going with. But here, this man made a decision to abrogate a mitzvah. The mitzvah of Pruruvu is a mitzvah to have children. He can't, Ruach HaKodesh can't trump that. We also know that, for example, in Navi, the Torah talks about Navi Sheker. A Navi can come along and tell you to do a mitzvah slightly differently, can whatever it might be, but to completely abrogate a mitzvah, you already know he's a Navi Sheker. So by him taking the Ruach HaKodesh, he may have said, maybe he could have said to himself, look, I'll have to take that chance. I'll have this child. I'll hopefully have other children too. This kid will be Batal B'Shishim. We'll figure something out. But to then just decide not to marry, there is a precedent for this as well, for him to have had gone to be married. How? I'll take from the same parsha you just took from, which is Vayelech ish mi bet Levi vayikach et bat Levi. When Amram gets married to Yocheved, what happens? The Midrash tells us that Miriam went to her parents and said, you separated, you got divorced, or at least you separated. How can that be? Your gzeira is worse than Paro. Paro lo gazara rak ala zecharim. Paro's gzeira, his decree was kill the boys, all the firstborn, all the boys. Your decree is to kill the boys and the girls because you're not having any children. So they listened to her and they got married again and they had children. So again, they can't just toss it because of what could be. Okay.
Gotcha. Yep.
Okay. Very good. Let's take a look. You're welcome. Take a look at the first pasuk in Perek Kaf, chapter 20, pasuk Aleph, number 1. Bayamim ahem chala Chizkiyahu lamut. At that time, which is the day, right around the time when Sancheriv dies, that's what Rashi tells us, Chizkiyahu was dying. And for those of you who have, actually, let me finish reading the pasuk and we'll go back to Rashi. Vayavoy elav Yishayahu ben Amoz hanavi. Yishayahu ben Amoz, the prophet, came to Chizkiyahu. Vayomer elav, and he said to him, Ko amar Hashem, this is what Hashem has said, Tzav leveitecha, give command to your household, Ki met ata, because you're going to die, v'lo tichya, and you're not going to live. Just a quick sidebar. If you have Rashi in your Tanakh, take a look at the Rashi. I didn't make a slide for it. Look at Rashi on Chala Chizkiyahu. The Chizkiyahu got sick. It says, V'yom shlishi, the third day, Kishala Beit Hashem, Yom Mapalato Shel Sancheriv. That was the day in which Sancheriv fell. Now, that's the last pasuk of the prior chapter. The Yom Tov Shel Pesach Haya. It was Pesach. You remember that last week we looked at a long piece, we only picked out a little bit of it, of the Targum Sheni on Megillat Esther, in the beginning of chapter 6, of Balayla Hahu. We talked about when the Tanakh uses the expression Bayamim Ahem or Balayla Hahu or something, it's significant. It means a very specific thing of either it's connected to an event or multiple events. We saw last week that the beginning of the 6th parak of Megillah actually connects to many, many events in Jewish history that occurred on that same night. And here it says that this was Pesach, this particular event. Now, let me ask you a question. I'm going to read the pasuk again. We've already explained why is it that it says it was in this world and the next world. But there's another very obvious question that you should be able to ask based on the background I gave you from the Gemara. By Yamim Ahem, in that day, at that time, Chizkiyahu began to die. And what did he say to him? Vayomer elav. Here's what he said. Ko amar Hashem. This is what Hashem has said. Tzav leveitecha, give command to your house. Ki met ata v'lo tichya. Anyone want to ask a question? It's not extremely obvious, but it should be slightly obvious.
Well, I was thinking from what you brought to us earlier, on the whole background of this from the Gemara, that Hashem did a pshara ben two tzadikim, and he basically made Chizkiyahu ill so that Yeshayahu would have to go to him as Bikur Cholim.
Okay.
And one of the purposes of Bikur Cholim was to help the Choleh get better, and Yeshayahu is doing exactly the opposite.
Okay, So that's what the Datso Freeman actually mentioned that he dafka did not daven for him, didn't do anything. Now, by the way, just as an aside, what Michael was saying is correct. That when you have a mitzvah, you do Bikur Cholim. Part of the mitzvah is to daven even in front of the person to ask for shlema. Okay, so but in this case we can't fault him because he's coming with a message from Hashem, right? So that I wouldn't say that, but the obvious there's based on the background I gave, there should be
suppress his nevuah as well.
Say that again.
He can't suppress his nevuah. It's forbidden for a Navi to suppress his nevuah.
That's correct. He has to give it, right? Okay, so there should be based on the background I gave you, you might be able to come up with another question on 2 words in this pasuk. It's worth 5 extra points.
2 consecutive words. 2 consecutive words.
2 consecutive words, yes.
If Chizkiyahu's the reason why Chizkiyahu is going to die is because he rejected having children, by dying, he will not have children.
Okay, and therefore? I'm asking about 2. I thought you were going the right direction, then you just jumped off that expressway exit the wrong way. And driving on the wrong side of the road, I might add. Okay.
That's a machloket.
I know. Tell me about it. Okay, so the words are that I want you to think about. Tzav leveitecha. Tzav leveitecha, I translate as command your household. Generally, that means is you leave an ethical will, that your family know your wishes and tell them what you're supposed to do in the future. What's wrong with that?
He doesn't have children.
He doesn't
have children. He's a family.
He's not married even. Not
married, he has no children. So what's Tzav leveitecha? Right. So funny you should ask. We're going to take a look at Abarbanel. Abarbanel commenting on this particular pasuk tells us as follows. Now you'll notice Chizkiyahu doesn't tell him straight out, at least in the pshat and the psukim, he doesn't tell him, oh, you didn't have any children, that's why you're going to die. How does the Gemara know that this was really the conversation? So the Abarbanel tells us, here's how. Because he made this comment about the reason for his being sick indirectly. Ki'ilu amar lo Chizkiyahu, it's as if, Ki'ilu amar lo, it's as if he were to say, Chizkiyahu, you have nobody to command to give down and pass along the word of what you do to be king. You have no children. And now you forced our hands because here goes the Davidic dynasty, right? Because everyone's a king from King David, and now you're cutting it off. We're gonna have to find a king from another family. You have nobody. Number one, you cut off the Davidic line. Number two, you don't have a wife and children in general. So what does he mean when he says tzav leveitecha? Your servants, you have to tell them what to do. He doesn't just mean that you won't exist in Olam Haba, but it means you don't have any legacy. You're leaving nobody. You're mamish leaving nobody. So this is how the Gemara through the Abarbanel is how the Abarbanel understands how the Gemara comes to the conclusion based on what Chizkiyahu is told from Yeshayahu. That's a mouthful. Why he's going to die. Okay. Tov. Let's take a look at the next pasuk. Bet. Now, pasuk bet, you should be able to understand better because of Chizkiyahu's response when he's told he's going to die. In the Gemara, I mean. Bet, number 2. Vayasev et panav el hakir, vayitpalel el Hashem lemor. And he turned his face towards the wall, and he davened to God, saying, and we'll see the tefillah in a minute. 2 questions. Number 1, why did he turn to the wall? And number 2, he was just told that God just made a decision. What's he davening for? Imagine that a person comes to an individual. You have to imagine, here it is. He said, you're going to die. You're not going to live. You messed up. You didn't have children. You didn't get married. Da, 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 da. Adios, amigo. Oh, wait, I'm going to daven. So the second question we sort of answered, because we have this statement in the Gemara that Chizkiyahu makes, which I'm sure some of you have heard before, which says, even if a very sharp sword is resting on your neck, you don't give up hope. You still hope to Hashem, not to hope, to daven Hashem, pray to Hashem, that things should work out. So that's why he davens. But wait, wasn't there already a decision made? What is davening going to do? So we sort of talked about this already a couple times in this class, and for sure in other classes, that tefillah, its purpose isn't to change God's mind. That's not how Hashem works. We don't change God's mind, because Hashem doesn't have a mind to be changed, as it were. What it does, tefillah changes us, and when we change, we become a different person, and whatever the gzeirah was would go, it goes away, because we're not that person anymore. I mean, that's pretty much an hour-long shiur in one sentence. But what is he turning to the wall for? Why doesn't he just daven? So a king, remember we talked about a few times that a king, there's a concept, a rav or a parent, shemachal al kvodo, kvodo machul. If I walk into the room and my daughter, my youngest daughter, who always gets up for me when I walk in the room, and I've told her many, many times, there's no need, but she doesn't accept it. She says she's going to continue doing it. I'm allowed to do that as a parent. And by the way, a parent should never insist and be very takif about, my kids have to stand up for me, my kids have to, because then you basically give too much emah, too much fear within the household as well. But I'm allowed to be mochel my kavod. I could say, look, or as a rav, sometimes someone will defer to me. I said, it's okay, you do that, or whatever it might be. I'm allowed to do that. Melech shemachal al kvodo, ein kvodo machul. A melech cannot overlook his kavod. If a king walks into the room, so to speak, they can't say, oh, no, sit down, it's okay. You can't do that. It's not acceptable. A melech is on a different level than everybody else. He's also not allowed to instill fear, panic, or anything else in others. Now, in spite of what we saw in the last chapter, where Chizkiyahu goes and runs to the Beit HaMikdash and davens, and then he sends messengers to go to Yeshayahu, etc. He was doing his due diligence. Wasn't necessarily panicking people. But if the people were to see, even though he's in his own palace, but the people were to see the king suddenly bursting into tears, crying out to God, because we're going to see he cries in the next pasuk, that could cause them to be in great fear, because maybe, remember, this is right around the time of Sancheriv, that, okay, we vanquished Sancheriv, God did that, but maybe something's going to happen to us through somebody else. A different king's going to come along, which, of course, we know they will. So that's why he has to turn towards the wall. And by the way, I remember many, many years ago when Barnea, the one who'll be speaking to us next week, he talked about this pasuk in depth to us, about turning towards the wall. I told him certain topics to talk about, but I give him free reign. He could talk about Chizkiyahu literally for hours, but we'll give him about a half an hour. Okay, take a look at the next pasuk, Gimel, number 3. And he said as follows, Ana Hashem zechorna et asher hitalachti lefanecha. Please, God, remember that I walked before you be'emet, in truth, uvelevav shalem, and in a whole heart. Tov beinecha asiti, and all that was good in your eyes I did. Vayevk Chizkiyahu bechi gadol. Chizkiyahu cried a great cry. Okay, first of all, before we look at the Dat Sofrim, why is he crying? What do you think? In your opinion, why do you think he's crying?
He was one of the most righteous kings, and here he's given this decree that he will die early.
And therefore?
It seems patently unfair.
So it seems unfair because he was a good guy. And what the heck? God, look at that, what I've done. right? I've done the right stuff. Why all of a sudden this bad decree? Okay, maybe. Any other possibility? Let me change the question. Why does he want to live?
Did he realize he was wrong about not having children because of what Yeshayahu said to him? And it's going to be the end of the Davidic dynasty.
Okay.
If he doesn't have children.
Okay. So you think he wants to live in order to have children, right?
Well, he's a righteous king. He says himself in his prayer that he does everything which is Tov B'nei Hashem. And Hashem, many generations earlier, chose his great-great-great-grandfather to be king over Israel, and that would be an everlasting dynasty.
Right.
And Chizkiah, you did lots and lots of good things, but this is terrible.
Oops. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to first answer you, and then I'm going to answer Harry. Okay. So part of the answer is that's correct. He realizes he's got to do the right thing, and he needs to do that obviously he can only do that when he's alive, but he's not looking just to live. That's not the point. He's not looking.
Can you hear me, Rabbi?
I'm sorry?
You hear me?
Yeah, 1 second. 1 sec. He wants to accomplish things, and we're going to see he accomplishes, if I'm not mistaken, more in the last amount of years he's allowed, which I'm giving a little spoiler alert, he's going to live, than he did in the rest of his life until now. So he wants to live to accomplish for Am Yisrael, not just to live. However, Harry's comment was, hey, it's not fair, right? Like, come on, look at all the good I did. So here's how I'm going to respond to you, and then I'll come back to Aryeh. We learned a long time ago, and I don't think, Harry, you weren't in the class at that point. There was the Navi that came after Eliyahu was Elisha. And Elisha was held by a woman every time he came through their community. And she finally ends up talking to her husband that, look, this man of God comes to the community all the time. Let's make a separate room for him, place for him to stay. Nice, let's make a nice place for him. And he does, and he goes in there and he stays. And the next day, Elisha sends his boy Gehazi, his helper. He says, go to the woman and ask this woman, this Isha Shunamit, ask her, what can I do for you? Can I do this, do that? And even can I speak to the king on your behalf? Her response was, no, I don't need anything. Betoch ami anochi yoshavet. I sit among my people. What does that mean? So we saw that that day was Rosh Hashanah, and that what he was saying to her was, I can speak to the king on your behalf, means the King of Kings, Hashem, and speak to him on your behalf. She said, no. I don't want the spotlight on me. Once you start putting the spotlight on me, look, all the good thing I did, then he'll say, oh, very nice, you did that, but look at this long laundry list of things you didn't do right. So she said, I don't want that spotlight on me. So the idea of him saying, I did this right, and I did this right, can't be because he wants to say, look, all the good I did. Because once you say that, then comes the other side. Well, Hashem says, great, look at this 976,000 other things you didn't do right. So that would be a little bit disparity. Okay, Aryeh.
I was going to say, I think you passed it, but he didn't cry because he had his priorities wrong.
He has priorities wrong. He cried about his actions, you're saying. Is that what you mean?
He did all the things of getting rid of Avodah Zorah, but didn't do his priority should have having a family. He cried because he had his priorities wrong.
Okay, good. So we also saw something like that when the family of Reuven come to Moshe Rabbeinu and they say that we want to, build pens for our livestock, we want to build houses for our children, and then we're going to go and help fight in Eretz Canaan. And Moshe Rabbeinu kind of knocks them down a peg and says, you mean you're going to build houses for your children and then you're going to build things for your animals? They put their animals first, their money came first. Okay, I like that. Let's take a look at the Dat Sofrim on this. Oh, I thought I made a copy of it. Okay, I did. I'll just read it to you. It's very short anyways. So just hang in there and listen. He says like this, that in Sefer Yeshayahu, and Perek Lamed Chet, if anyone wants to go look it up, there's actually a letter or a poem that Chizkiyahu writes once he becomes healthy again. And in that letter, it explains to Am Yisrael, it describes the spiritual situation Chizkiyahu found himself in at this moment. Chizkiyahu was only 39 years old. He was very shaken to the core that that in a very personal way, that this age, at such a young age, he was decreed to die. And more so, that he wasn't able to continue his work for this generation. This is one of the things I wanted to point out. It says, Shada'ag lehem gam b'chomer v'gam b'ruach. Chizkiyahu was crying, according to Dat Sofrim and many, many other commentaries, not just because he wanted to live longer, not just because he had his priorities wrong, not just because he wanted to have another child and a child and continue the Davidic dynasty, but because he wanted to work Leman Am Yisrael. He wanted to work for the people. He had things to do both in terms of spirituality, in terms of physical, which we will see some two major projects that will come under his jurisdiction. For those, and one I'm going to tell you about right now, because most of you, if not all of you, have seen this. When you go into the old city and you go by the Cardo, and you're standing before, like you go down the stairs, and you'll see before you go into the Cardo, you see like these columns, and you're looking over an area that has tile flooring from Bayit Sheni time. You're looking at these columns. This was the Cardo. You will see that what looks like there's this retaining wall that is holding up the wall of that section. That's what we will learn about in English. Is called Chizkiyahu's broad wall. That's something Chizkiyahu built, that he actually did that, and also, which was a fortification for Yerushalayim, which Barnea will talk to us about. In addition to that, he also built an aqueduct system in the land of Israel. So he had some major projects still that he had in his mind to do, physical. We're not even talking the spiritual part yet. So this is why he's crying. He wants to serve Am Yisrael. So let's take a look at the next pasuk. We may or may not get to that to that theological question, or those theological questions. We'll see. Vayhi Yishayahu, I'm in pasuk Daled number 4. Vayhi Yishayahu lo yatsa hachatzer hatichona. The Yishayahu did not. I know it says ha'ir. That says the word that's written is city, and the word that's read is his courtyard. So after Yeshayahu left the presence of the king, he didn't even leave the main courtyard, and he gets another calling from Hashem. Hashem said to him, Shuv, go back. Go back to Chizkiyahu and tell him, so as the Lord God said, the God, the king, the father, the God of your father David, Shamati et tfilatecha, I heard your prayer. Ra'iti et dima'atecha, I saw your tears. Hineni rofelach, I am going to heal you. Bayom hashlishi, on the third day, ta'ale beit Hashem, you are going to go to the Beit HaMikdash. One more pasuk. V'hosafti al yamecha chamesh esrei shana, I will add to your life 15 years. Umikaf melech Ashur atzilecha, and I will save you from the king of Assyria. V'eta'ir hazot, and this city. V'ganoti al ha'ir hazot, and I will protect the city. L'ma'ani, for my sake. L'man David Avdi, and for the sake of my servant David. Okay, this has a plethora of theological issues. I'm going to talk about a couple of them. One is, how did this exactly work? We sort of talked a little bit about this, that Hashem decides to remove the decree through the tefillah, but more importantly, leads us to another question. Hashem says he's going to add 15 years to his life. Does that mean he was destined to die? I'll make up a number, because Dat Sofrim said he was 39 at this point. That he was destined to die at 39, but Hashem added 15 years to his life? Or he was destined to die at 54. Did I do the math right? Yes. but he was going to die early because of his sins. But now Hashem's going to just add them back into where he was. Okay, so I'm going to come back to that second question in a couple minutes. First, we have to look at something I think is absolutely fascinating. I'm going to share the screen twice, two different things. Okay, we're going to go to somewhere that's going to say like, what am I talking about? I'm going to show you on the screen in a minute, Ashrei. It's actually Ashrei. That there's a missing letter in Ashrei, that most of you know this, but most people are very unaware that there's more than one letter missing in Ashrei. So what am I talking about? Let's take a look. Let's take a look at Ashrei. Okay. For those of you who are unaware, Ashrei Yoshvei Betecha is according to the alphabet. Okay, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, right? Fine, very nice. It goes through all the Aleph, Bet, almost, more or less. We'll see in a minute. Etc., etc. Of course, many of you know, that when you get down to here, you have Malchutcha, Malchut Kol Olamim, Mem Shaltecha B'chol Dor V'dor. So you have Kaf, Lamed, Mem, boom, there's no Nun. Somech Hashem L'chol Noflim, so there's a Samach, there's the Nun's the missing. So I heard one time a very nice idea, that some people, that they are nofel, they fall, and it's not even obvious. They're having trouble in life. They're going through crisis, but somech, the samach, here's the nun right here. Hashem is the somech to the nofel, to the one who's falling. Okay, very nice. So we see that there's apparently a nun missing, but there's buried in there somewhere. Hang on, look at this. Okay, I took Ashrei, and I have not rearranged. I have put a space on every line, and what do we come out with? Every single line has a vav in it, a vav hachibur, right? Every single one. What's a vav hachibur? Connecting vav, and. Except one line. The Vilna Gaon is, I don't know if he's the one that caught this. I don't know exactly where he got his background on this particular one. But the Vilna Gaon calls the missing vav. What is the missing vav? I'm going to see what's so important. Karov Adonai lechol kore'av lechol asher yikaruhu ve'emet. God is close to those who call him, and to all those who call to him in truth. Okay, why of all the psukim is this missing a vav? Why no vav? Every other pasuk has this pattern, right? Here you have it, here you have it, here you have it. Every single line in Ashrei, except this one, no vav. Karov Hashem lekol korav. Hashem is close to all those who call to him. L'chol asher yikaruhu ve'emet. Where's the vav? Anyone want to take a stab at why? Maybe.
No need for it.
Because
of the word karov.
You're on the right track.
If Hashem is karov, a vav is connecting two things which are not connected, which are apart. If you're karov, you're not apart. You don't need the vav.
Excellent. I was waiting for just a little bit more amplification. It sounds like they read this shitchi, very surface way, that only if Hashem's only close to you if you call out to him. That's not the case. Just as it was just now pointed out, these vavs, all these vavim here, are the idea of this and that. But Hashem, even if a person never calls out to God, even if a person never davens, even if a person, I'm not advocating it, by the way, even if a person is completely removed from Hashem completely in his life, chas v'shalom, Hashem's still there. Hashem is still karov. Maybe a little bit closer when we actually turn to God. But Hashem is always there. There is no need for the vav hachibur. There's no need for this connecting vav, as it was just said, because the chibur, the connection, is always there. That's the chiddush of the Vilna Gaon, by the way. It's very, very good. I loved it. Why am I mentioning this? You might look at this particular series of psukim and say, well, why did he answer him? Because he davened well, he He had zechuyot in his life, but who am I? Who am I? I'm just another, schlepper in life, and I do what I do, and I try to do my best, and I can never really expect anything. Why should I daven? Or sometimes I can daven, but I don't necessarily believe it's going to happen because I'm no Chizkiyahu Melech. I'm no Eliyahu. I know Elisha. I know anybody. Part of the message of Karov Hashem L'chol Kol Ra'av is exactly the opposite. No matter where you're holding in life, whatever struggles you're going through, whatever's happening, there is this ability not to reconnect with God, because you don't need to reconnect. The only disconnect is on your end. It's never on Hashem's end. Never, ever, ever, ever you disconnected from Hashem from his end. Never. It's only on your end. So therefore, since he's always there, it's just a matter of opening your heart once again. And once you do that, as the Gemara says in many places, Hashem just wants you to open up like a pinhole, a little teeny, tiny hole, and he'll open it up like a great hall. And it'll help you with whatever you need. Because the truth is that when Hashem responds, if you take a look at the pasuk again, take a look at pasuk hey, number 5. What is the first thing he says? Koma Hashem Elokei David Avicha, right? He says, so has the God of your father David said, and he ends the next pasuk with, why am I doing this? Leman David Avdi. I'm doing this for the sake of my servant David. Meaning, yes, Chizkiyahu, I heard your tefillah, I saw your tears, but what you have going for you more than anything is zechut avot, the merit of your great-great-great-great-grandfather, David HaMelech. That's what you have going for you. You and I have zechuyot avot. We have Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. There are our Abis, there are Zaydis, the avot imahot. I've mentioned this. This is not my line. As a matter of fact, the first time I heard it was actually from this Barnea, who you'll meet next week. I told some of this a story before, that my first group that I brought to Israel in 2001, I think it was 2001. We were on a bus in the morning heading from Yerushalayim towards Hebron. And he got up and said, okay, he's telling us about our day, our plan. He says, okay, our first stop is we're going to visit our grandparents. No, he said our bubbies and zaydis. It's like, what? And then realized, it took a second or two. We were going to Hebron because we're going to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and we're going to Sarah, Rivka, Leah, not to Rachel, of course. We tend to forget that, by the way. We tend to forget that we are direct descendants of the Avot Imahot. They weren't just these great personalities in our Jewish history, but we are direct descendants from them. We are their great, 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 multiple times grandchildren. So if we were to take out our photo album that would go back 3,500 years, 4,000 years, we'd have all the pictures there of Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. They'd be like, great times, 1,000 grandfather, great times, 1,000 grandmother. No different than your, tonight, I said, my Zaydis Yartzeit, this is one came before him. So that's what Chizkiyahu had going for him. And this is what the part of the message of this pasuk. There's one other question I didn't address yet, which I'm going to put off, but I'm going to just finish this point first. That what is it that we have going for us when we daven? It has our heartfelt beliefs, our heart getting into it, our tears, our emotion, our sincerity. But above all, what we have along with all that helps push it through the door is zechut avot, the merit of our forefathers and foremothers, of what they went through, what they did at the bidding of Hashem for us. And to this day, we still have that going for us. We make reference to it in davening every single solitary day. The question I'm going to leave you with, and we'll discuss if I get to it next week after Barnea, is what exactly is this idea of the Hashem added, in quotes, 15 years of life to Chizkiyahu? Did he reinstate 15 years that he took off? Or did he actually have Xerat to die at a certain age, and now he added on an additional 15 years? A tiny hint to the answer.
What does it make?
I'll tell you.
What difference does it make?
Okay, we'll talk about that also. It's a good question. I'm going to give you a hint. The answer is actually based in last week's parsha. You might find it. If you do, send me a little note, but don't post it in the group. And then
you said last week's parsha, the Mishpatim from yesterday, or Yitzro from over a week ago?
Mishpatim, yesterday.
Mishpatim, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
from Mishpatim. You might
I know
find it.
people
It's
mean
not,
by
it's not
Parsha,
totally
something.
unobvious. It's in there as being the
Okay.
basis for the background to this, but it doesn't give you the answer. It doesn't give you the answer, but the basis for the discussion in the Gemara and other places is found in last week's parasha. So again, for those of you who came in late, next Sunday night, 7 o'clock, Bezrat Hashem, we have a guest joining us, Barnea Selavan. I will give a proper introduction at that point. We will talk about Chizkiyahu. And until then, have a Shavua Tov.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
What?
Thank you so much. Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov. Be well.